Hello, everyone. Welcome to this second to last lecture in Unit 1 on our series on political science. Just as a reminder, after this lecture, we have one more, and then you will need to complete the exam for Unit 1. It's relatively speaking straightforward. I really wouldn't worry about it. And you can refer to the syllabus for more details on how those quizzes work. Today we're going to be talking about Adam Smith, and in particular on Adam Smith, what we're going to be talking about are what exactly is the role of the government when it comes to the economy. Now, before we move on, very quickly, Smith was born in the 18th century. He was born in Scotland, and he became a professor not of economics, but of philosophy at the University of Glasgow. And he writes two major works. The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which, to be honest, nobody reads, because the big one and the important one is The Wealth of Nations, which comes out in 1776. And in The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith tries to understand both what the economy is and what the government should do about the economy. And so this is going to help us understand exactly why Smith is called the father of capitalism, in particular, a brand of capitalism known as liberalism. And so let's begin. Towards the beginning of the book, Adam Smith defines what he means when he says political economy. And he says that it proposes two distinct objects, two distinct goals. The first is to provide a plentiful revenue or subsistence for the people and more properly enable them to provide such a revenue or subsistence for themselves. And secondly, to supply the state with a revenue sufficient for the public services. It proposes to enrich both the people and the sovereign. A good political economy at the end of the day makes both the ruler, the state, and the ruled, the people, wealthier. That's the goal of having a good political economy. If the economy is run well, the state gains an extra tax revenue and the people gain because they're making more money. And so he says, in order to really understand what makes up a good political economy, there's two concepts in Smith that you need to understand: the division of labor and the invisible hand. So let's start with the division of labor. He says the greatest improvement in the productive powers of labor and the greater part of the skill, dexterity, and judgment with which it is anywhere directed or applied seems to have been the effects of the division of labor. The division of labor has been, in Smith's mind, the greatest improvement in how we make things. So why engage in the division of labor? It makes every worker more specialized and more productive. It makes the economy more efficient. When people are more specialized, that makes the economy more efficient. And it saves costs for everyone. And it's the great multiplication of the productions of all the different arts in consequence of the division of labor, which occasions in a well-governed society that universal opulence, that universal wealth, which extends itself to the lowest ranks of the people. Now, the way I like to explain this concept to students is sort of take a look into a mirror and take a look at yourself, right? You're taking this course online. You're taking this lecture, and you are trying to learn about political science. Now, you're not doing this because I'm such a great guy or because you really, really are passionate about political science. Like, those things may both be true, not to toot my own horn, but that's not why you're listening to this lecture. You're listening to this lecture because you want to get the grade, and you want to get the grade because you're here getting an education. And you're getting an education not because getting an education is important or because it's valuable. These things are both true, but that's not why. You're doing it because it's going to get you paid. You're doing it for the promise of future revenue. That's the big thing. Right? You are going to school, getting an education because at the end of the day, it will make you a more valuable member of the labor force, which promises you future revenue. Minimum wage jobs cost minimum wage because anyone can do them. They require no particular set of skills. There's a reason why let's say a dentist makes more than minimum wage because that requires a great amount of skill to do. And you get that through education. And so this is what we mean when we talk about the division of labor. When you are engaging in education, you are specializing. And when you specialize, you inevitably make more money. You make yourself valuable. Now that's odd because you're doing something good for society, but you're not doing it because it's good for society. You're doing it because it's good for you. Smith, to some extent, also uses the concept of a state of nature. And you're going to see what Smith has to say about people in this picture. This is Gordon Gekko from the famous movie Wall Street. And his famous line, if you guys know or recall, is greed is good. Now, I don't think Smith would agree with the line that greed is good, but he would certainly say that greed is natural, that greed is the base drive of why we do what we do. And that's okay. It's natural, and that's okay. Smith uses in a brief sort of part of the book, looks at a state of nature, and what he finds is that there's one thing in common that every society on earth has created. It's not a singular religion, it's not a singular set of politics or a singular culture, it's currency. Every society, to some extent, has created money because money is just an easier and better and more efficient way of getting what we want. So, for example, in a state of nature, if you and I, come across something that we both want, we can fight for it. But why would we do that when we can just trade for what we want? And appealing to each other's greed, we're able to more effectively get what we're looking for, right? Violence is ineffective at getting what you want. Instead, you can appeal to someone's greed. He says, amongst men, the most dissimilar geniuses are of use to one another. The different produces of their respective talents, and by the general disposition to truck, barter, and exchange. We have an innate desire to trade with each other, to exchange with each other, because we're all good at different things. And so when we all do those different things, and we trade what we're good at with each other, we all benefit, being brought, as it were, into a common stock, where every man may purchase whatever part of the produce of another man's talents he has occasion for. And so, as I said, greed may not be good, but it's definitely natural, and that's okay. Smith's big point is that we need to sort of get over ourselves in saying that greed is bad. Greed is a base driver of human nature. In a state of nature, we wouldn't fight over what we want. We would trade instead. And that's not because we're nice, peaceful people. It's because we're greedy and we recognize that appealing to someone else's greed is a better way of getting what we want. He says, more simply, it's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages. So let me give you an example. Maybe instead of paying attention, you are eating something while listening to this lecture. Now, unless you literally grew everything yourself that's on your plate, chances are you went to a supermarket or you went to a restaurant or any sort of place that sells food, and you did not go, hey man, I'm really hungry, could I please just get myself a bagel and leave? They'll laugh at you. Instead, you appeal to their self-love. You pay them. Right? Dunkin' Donuts is not a charity. They're a money-making business. And unless you pay them, you're not getting your meal. And that seems natural to us. And that's okay, because that means that everyone does the same. And it's better, we become better at getting what we need. He says we can't get everything we want by ourselves. And so we have to rely on other people to get what we need. I certainly would not know how to make half the things that I eat, but I buy them. right? Because I rely on other people to get what I want. And all of us act out of self-interest. Every one of you listening to this, not just a couple of you, all of you act out of self-interest to get what you want, and that's okay. And this is why we specialize. This is why we engage in the division of labor, because it promotes a higher standard of living for everyone. And this sort of leads quite naturally into the invisible hand, because what he's saying is that each individual, every one of us, neither intends to promote the public interest, nor knows how much he is promoting it. He intends only his own gain, and he is in this and many other cases led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention, nor was it always the worse for the society that was no part of it. What he says is that there exists an invisible hand, an invisible force that pushes us to be greedy. And yet when we do so, we are actually doing what's good for society because we are getting educated, diversifying what we can buy. That's good for society. When we all act in our own self-interest, that collectively leads to the best outcome. We specialize and divide labor out of self-interest, not common goals. And that leads to a better outcome than any government policy, right? When we all engage in our greedy self-interest, that always leads to a better outcome than any government policy. Our shared greed guides us collectively like an invisible hand. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. I have never known much good done by those who affected to trade for the public good. What he's saying is when we are all greedy and when we all follow what the invisible hand tells us, that leads to the most efficient outcome in our society. Now that doesn't always mean the most equitable outcome. That just means the best outcome. And that always leads to the outcome that leads to the most wealth for the most people. And so what should the government do in this case? Nothing at all. That's what Smith is saying. Smith is saying that the best thing the government can do in regards to the economy is to just stay out of it. Let the invisible hand do its thing. Guarantee security, guarantee free trade, guarantee all of these things. But when it comes to intervening in the economy, according to Smith, the best thing to do is nothing. That's what Smith says that we should do. Now, I hope that made sense. And again, feel free to email me, message me if you have any questions. And we can close this up here, I think. Our next lecture is going to be the last lecture in Unit 1, and I hope to see you there for it. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.